welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I hope you can find a seat.
You can come up to the front if you want.
We probably won't bite, but you never know. First, I just want to say a big, huge thank you to Art Jameel. This whole weekend of events have been really exciting, and seeing so many students and seeing so many young people and having these conversations about careers in arts have been really illuminating. And so it's been a really exciting weekend. I'm excited that we get to be here with these three great artists, and you're going to get to learn so much about all of them, from their school years to their professional career. My name is Jolaine. I'm the director of the Institute for Emerging Art, and then I'm here with Moza, Nasser, and Rand, in case you don't know them. So I think we're going to have, I think what's nice about what we're going to do is we really plan this for sort of people that don't know about their practices, to really get to know a little bit more about how and why they make art. And I think you're actually going to be really delighted to learn a bunch of things that you don't know. So we're going to start. Moza, do you want to start with a little bit about you?
Okay, well, I'll try not to read. So I'm Moza. I'm an artist. I've trained as a pastry chef as well. I'm really just super into food. It filters into my life and my work. So much so that I've also stepped out of the kitchen to look at other food practices in different landscapes. So I've been working with farmers and beekeepers and foragers, as well as chefs. And I write as well. I'm not sure where to end with this bio. I'll let you read it as we go along.
And your writings have been published locally and internationally.
Thank you so much, Nasser.
Actually, for this bio, I also took inspiration from Moza, because when we were discussing, how to introduce ourselves, that is not, not the same way we introduce ourselves on our website or through like exhibition publication, and trying to make it more fun. So like, yeah, I'm Nasser Alzayani. I'm an artist and a writer, and I have a research-based practice. But I think at the core of it, I really enjoy telling stories, and especially stories from our past that I try to reframe and present narratives that are kind of outside of what you usually would find in a history book.
Are you reading my bio?
No. Sorry.
Do you have a copyright infringement?
We're all stealing from each other.
We have a lot of affinities in our
Yeah, I mean, I pretend to be an archaeologist, and
So
I
do
know
I.
I know Mace.
I
I
like that
was
one.
going to put that, but I
was like, oh, Nasser.
I have
I
never
beat you to
studied
it.
archaeology.
Neither have we. It's
There you
but
go, the 4 founding members of this club.
yeah, the pretend archaeologists club. But yeah, I think most of my work has some element of archaeology or geology, and I'm really interested in fiction, and so especially science fiction and fantasy, and I think those are things that also merge really well with the archaeological, because we always attempt to make stories and kind of make sense of our past, and so I'm in the work that you might see a few examples of. I try to do that.
So my name is Rand, and I am an artist whose foundation is actually in architecture and design. And yeah, kind of in a similar vein, I'm also really interested in kind of fragile histories or lost histories, and kind of working with archives, so like, capital H history, but then also oral narratives, in thinking about ways to kind of reconstruct them or retell them, typically through sculpture and installation. Yeah, I think I'll end it at that.
So when we were thinking about today, and today being the day where we were going to have a lot of high school students here, we were discussing amongst ourselves a little bit about when we were 18 and when we were in that age where we were coming up with what we were doing, we wanted to think about what we were doing when we were 18 and what we were doing now, and how that kind of trajectory came together. I know I wanted to be a nurse. But I'm interested in what other people were interested, how you guys get from where you were to where you are.
I couldn't actually find a photo of me doing anything art related when I was 18. But this was a photograph, I would say, I think when I was still at university, and I was also studying architecture at AUS. And I think it's an interesting moment because this was something that was kind of outside of my university coursework. It was something that I really just enjoyed doing for myself, and those were the beginnings of my art practice. I think I was very much interested in observation, and that was that came out through drawing, and this was a drawing workshop I was conducting with the Sharjah Art Foundation, and this was, I think, on the Abra in Sharjah. But really just trying to go out into the world and find interesting moments to then record them. And from there, I found my way into different art programs, SEAF being one of the most pivotal moments in my art career, where I went in actually as someone who mostly did 2D work and did drawings, and came out as someone who barely draws anymore. But that's because I was exposed to so many different methods and materials that I really broadened my horizons, and I think the curiosity of discovery and observation really pushes that until today.
Next.
I'll keep going.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
So this is me at not quite 18. But I don't know. Again, like Nasser, I think it was like difficult to find a photo of me doing something at that time. It's in some lost hard drive somewhere. But I felt like this image, I don't know, I like it a lot because, one, it shows a sort of engagement with the city. If some of you are any like Abu Dhabi kids, you might know that this is the famous volcano fountain that was demolished, and it's no longer there. But I think it holds a special place in terms of the kind of collective urban memory. And that's something I'm really interested in, kind of the vestiges of the past, and finding a way to kind of resurrect them. So yeah, I was, actually wanting to become an astronaut, and looking into kind of aeronautical engineering. But thank God my father was like, nah, you should be an architect. And I resisted it for a while, but I think it finally kind of captured my imagination. I was someone who was always kind of naturally creative, and so this sort of made sense that you're creative, you can do something that still can earn you a living, as we were told. And I think pursuing a career in the arts at that time wasn't something that we ever really imagined. But yeah, from there, it's a very kind of natural route into research, investigation, design, the city, and through a series of kind of events that were completely unplanned, including the SEAF Fellowship, I think, which was also very instrumental in my career path, because I think before that I didn't really consider myself an artist. So here we are.
Okay, so I guess we're all copying each other's answers at this point, because I too will be talking about SEAF. So this wasn't really when I was 18. When I was 18, I had just graduated from the interior design program at the College of Fine Arts in Zayed University, where I've developed my art foundation, but also had this deep interest in space, and which translated into engagements with land, especially during SIF. And so this was really the first work that I felt was so resolved after SIF. This was part of the Artist in Residence program in Dubai that was in partnership with Art Dubai and Delphina Foundation and Tashkil. And this was displayed there in 2016 as part of that. And these flags basically have images of textures from the mountainscapes that are quarried, and using natural dyes that are familiar in heritage dyeing practices, but they're not really from here. And so I was questioning place and a lot of things that I still question, the relevance of indigeneity in a lot of these places, and kind of how to exhibit loss and change. And a lot of it came out in this kind of like really raw moment after all these curiosities that I developed when I was in university through SIF and then after that.
In 1929, Virginia Woolf said, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. It's a privilege to have a space to make art." Can you tell us a little bit about your studios, both as a physical space and as a creative space? And what advice do you have for young artists if they don't have this opportunity?
Oh. So I've been really fortunate to have, again, gone through SIF, and kind of there was this upper level in the SIF villas that was the alumni space, but it was really a storage space. And so when we finished my batch in 2017, it was actually Dina Khurshid and I that kind of moved up there, cleaned it up, and sort of transformed that space into a place where we could kind of work. And it was actually really nice to be there together. She's now, well, she was in Beirut, and now she's at RISD doing her MFA. So yeah, I'm still kind of based within the SIF space, surrounded by, past years worth of work and research and all the things that are kind of occupying my head and mind for the future.
So my studio is in Sharjah, and I work there by myself. And how I came to decide to have a studio space was after going through a lot of studio spaces through school and residency programs where I had to share space, and then had to really identify what I needed to have in that space and if I could share. And I keep inviting people over, and luckily some people do oblige and come over. I try to set it up also as a community space where people can come and feel safe enough to discuss anything. It is definitely a privilege. I keep saying I don't think I'm going to hold on to it for much longer, and maybe my studio space is going to keep shifting as my practice shifts. I've also been working a lot in different landscapes, and so that has become my studio as well, to really be out there in different mountain ranges and not be confined in a room alone. It's also really important to invite people over, also to not be stuck in your own head, and to be able to think out loud and to have fresh eyes looking at your work. And this is really the advice that I have for everyone. I'm not going to talk about SIF anymore, but I do want to say that it's been really beneficial to build a community, or to be part of a community of people to reach out to when I do feel stuck. So in those ways, it doesn't matter whether or not you have a studio. I think the most important thing is the community that you build around you.
Oops, sorry. Oops, back, back.
Yeah, this is a photo of my studio currently, which is a brand new space in my home. And I think, yeah, I mean, I had these, grand ideas of what a studio looks like, and I think for a lot of artists, we have this image of the studio that is in a warehouse somewhere, or in some kind of other space that you can really kind of expand your ideas and go bigger, and have a blank slate of some sort. And I mean, that definitely works for some people, and I think it really depends on your means, and also how you can take advantage of what's around you. I think, with all of us, when we went into the SEAF program, one of the most important things that we were offered was studio space, and in addition to studio space, also adjacency to other artists who were making work. And I think that that's something that really kind of drives your practice forward, because there's an energy that exists when you're in a space with other artists who are making things that you never dreamed to make. But that's not always the reality, and after you're done with the SEAF program, unless you're Rand, you have to find a new space. But you have to be smart about
It's been
it.
a very contentious issue.
But you have to be smart about it. And I think, with you recognize that there was an opportunity, and it was something that could really benefit and further your practice. And I think over the years, I sort of moved my studio from residencies to my living room, to an art foundation here or there. But at the end of the day, I sort of realized that the place I feel most comfortable making work is at home. And it's also because I have all of my stuff there. And I want to be able to go into the studio in the middle of the night when I was lying in bed and I had an idea and I just need to put it on paper now. And yeah, it gets messy. This is in progress of a lot of different projects, but I do think it's really important to really focus on what you can do with what you have.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really, you see three different kind of opportunities. Moza, who has her own space, you who make your space at home, and Rand, who's, what's the word, hijacking a space? I want to move on to sort of this idea of feeding your practice. And, while the UAE isn't New York and London, I think there's a lot of, going out and seeing art is still really important. And I just wanted each of you to maybe talk about some of the secret tips and gems, institutions, and places that inspire you that maybe aren't institutional based. Of course, Jameel is at the top of everyone's list. They all told me that, don't worry.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. When I was in grad school in London, I found it really frustrating to have to take my work for crits in class and have to spend half that time unpacking things that have nothing to do with the work. So I have to suddenly be the spokesperson to my culture and my background and all that fun stuff. And so I want to loop back to the idea of community and how important it is, because I had to take the initiative to be part of different communities where I didn't have to do that, and show my work within different groups of people and different platforms where I didn't have to explain myself and could just present work. And so the picture that you see is part of a performance that I did while I was in London, as part of an exhibition I put together with a group of other art students, Arab art students from different countries who were just in London to for a temporary time to study art, and we called it the Arab Art Salon. We thought it was a good idea at the time, but it was really effective, and it was an example of one of the groups that I was engaged with. and where we didn't have to wait for an opportunity, we created our own opportunities, and we created our own spaces to you know, present work for crits, write stuff, respond to what was going back in our own countries. And really, this is what continues to feed my practice even after I've moved back, is to still be able to reach out to my community here. But I've also been going to different countries. Recently, I've taken a few trips to Bahrain to meet the artists there, to create networks there as well, and see what are we responding to at this time. What are our concerns? Do they align? Are they different? I've also been in Jeddah. And I'm really curious. I've been in Cairo, and I'm really curious about expanding that as well regionally and not just locally.
I decided to add these two images because I wanted to give an example of kind of a thought, yeah, just kind of like tracing an idea and a thought, and how it went from conception on a visit to Jameel Arts Centre, and this was in 2020. So the image on the left is from Michael Rakowitz's exhibition that opened 2 years ago, and it's from his project called The Breakup. And in this work, he has a political button that says "To hell with Nasser," and as a joke, I took it seriously, and I felt very offended. So me and my sister Mariam decided to make these buttons and change hell to heaven. And at the end of the show, we actually sent Michael one of these buttons, but I never heard back from him until a few weeks ago when his show opened at Green Art Gallery. And when I went up to introduce myself, he gave me a hug and said, "That was you." But yeah, I think, you know, just having like these, you know, I think these moments really are, you know, I mean, they really remind you of like how far an idea can go. And I mean, I don't have like a whole body of work with this button, but I do have ideas for one, and I think these are seeds that you can plant and can grow in the future.
So I've spent maybe the last 5 years just spending a lot of time in archives, museums, looking at collections, books, and really kind of invested in a time and place that is so far detached from me, right? A lot of my interest has been ancient Mesopotamian culture, history, archaeology, and so I think for a while I was feeling like kind of not very grounded here. So over the past year, I'd say I've been really looking for a way to kind of reconnect, and one of the ways I've really found that is by learning a lot about mud brick architecture and earthen architecture. So this is from a workshop in Al Ain in Jahili Fort. And what it's doing for me is that in a way it's still kind of connected to materiality, a way of building that is, you know, as ancient as us, but grounding me in a way that is a lot more kind of tactile and engaging with an extension of that history in the place where I am now. And so I've been, you know, really learning a lot and experimenting with this sort of material, and it's seeping into my work, thinking a lot about earth and body. And I hope that in a few months' time you'll see a little bit of these outcomes.
That is perfect, because we're going to move on to the topic of making work. And I just want if all of you can sort of tell a little bit about the process of starting a new project. Do you take specific steps? Do you kind of have a, preliminary drawings, travel? All of you have, when we were talking together, we all talked about you all having research-driven processes. And I also remember Moza said that she's a researcher in the practice of being human rather than being an artist. And I just wondered if all of you can talk a little bit about how you go about making work.
Okay.
Are these the pearls?
Yeah, these are the pros. Yeah, I think it's really hard to define, I guess, starting points for how, for projects. I think a lot of times for me, it's coincidence plays a really big role, because I'll be interested in one thing, but then, or I'll be interested in two different things, but I'll find in a moment a time where they intersect. And they'll intersect in ways that I don't predict, and I find really interesting, because I feel like this is not something I've seen before. So, a couple of examples here are, on the left is a collection of pearls that I made. This was a result of finding, well, I was doing my MFA, and I was looking into alchemical recipes, and I had no relation to any of these recipes, because they just, they were so far removed from me and my practice here and now. But one thing that I did find was this recipe for pearls, and the recipe claimed that they would be pearls that looked just like real pearls that you would find in the sea or the ocean. And I was really curious about that, because I'm from Bahrain, and Bahrain is very famous for its pearls. And so I thought, let's see, maybe I can make some and try to trick people. And so I actually copied this recipe, and I don't recommend it, because it has some toxic material as part of its ingredients. But I tried to replace those with other things, and in the end I think they look kind of like pearls. I mean, they're not pearls, but they're not pearl-like. And there's another image, and at some point there was a portrait of me with a pearl earring in there. I'll let you find it on my website. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times it's just curiosity and like an interest to try to play with something, because I think it's interesting to me personally, or I think it's funny, or I think it's really poignant in one way or the other. And then on the right, I just have an example of me doing a test of casting a landscape, because I just had this idea that I wanted to replicate a landscape, so I just went and did it, and it worked. And so sometimes you don't know if something's possible until you just go out and try it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
The question was about inspiration.
Making work. How do you make work?
How do you make work? Yeah.
Why do you make work?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is like, these random stories that you come upon in research that kind of lead you in a direction that you never really expected. A story where you dig further and you uncover another story, and all of a sudden you connect the dots. And sometimes I'm like, is this like coincidence, a crazy coincidence, or is it me that's making these connections? It's kind of hard to tell. But I guess with more recently, I've also kind of started to invite people into the process of making work. And so when was it? 2 years ago, I was invited by the Shubak Festival in London, who in the years between festivals kind of invite artists to do residencies, and a lot of them tend to be really community-based public engagement projects. And they were really interested in kind of working with the Arab community, the Iraqi community in London that has, you know, a very long kind of rooted history there. And for me, kind of coming as an outsider, I was really searching for, you know, what could be one thing, a simple thing that could allow us to really start on the same page. And I thought about, you know, the kind of formative experiences of being in a diaspora household and having your parents kind of fill your house with these objects, remnants of home, and how sometimes even the most kind of, you know, banal object like a notebook or something or a recipe book can hold so much meaning and value when that's all that you have kind of tying you to a place, tying you to memories. And so I got to work with a group of women from that starting point, you know, asking them to bring along an object that they either took from their home country or they had inherited from, let's say, their parents who moved from there, something that has deep sentimental value. And it was just kind of amazing to see how that very simple personal thing could lead you to really kind of start to unwrap and unravel a lot of conversations around displacement, around belonging, around language, around legacy and responsibility, and kind of how do you pass on that burden to the next generations. And it enriched my practice in ways I cannot describe. It gave vocabulary for things that I always thought or felt but never had the kind of community to really speak about. And not only did they form part of the research, but they actually became very much part of the making of the work itself, because I collaborated with one of them on a kind of performative work where it was Intisar Hajali, who was working with me, her story about leaving her house in Syria, about longing for the garden and the jasmine tree and the grapevine, and kind of transformed that into a kind of performative walk that was also that I was responding to with a series of sculptures. So that's yeah, I think that was, you know, an element of the work that I wanted to highlight, to show that, you know, as an artist we tend to kind of work alone. But it's been a really, you know, enriching and eye-opening experience to actually bring people into your practice and into the process of making work.
Thank you. Whoops, sorry, we missed one. There we go. I was trying to think when I said why I said, you know, the practice of being human and not an artist. I think it's because, you know, Nasser and Rand already mentioned a lot of things start with coincidence and with just the way that you lead your life, and sometimes you just then have to take a decision whether or not you want to turn this into work. And so what I've been doing for a very long time is going out to different landscapes and really just looking at what's going on in these landscapes. And in this picture, what you see is a rock formation that people who forage for honey, that's what they would do. They would create these rock formations to encourage wild bees to make their nests inside. And then they can collect the honey from there. And obviously, that's not something I could ever read about or could never find just so much information about so readily. And so I do have to go and scavenge for these things just with a curiosity and not with this agenda of turning it into an artwork. I mean, maybe I stumble upon some things and I just let it be, and I just take it in and enjoy that experience. But some of the things really stay with me, and I think about them a lot, and they inform how I, you know, just go on with my practice from there.
Thank you. Many artists have day jobs so that they can sustain their practice. All of you are art educators. And I wondered if you can talk about what else you do and how working in these fields feeds your practice. Who goes first?
Yeah, so I work in museum education in Abu Dhabi, kind of started in art centers, running workshops for kids, and really our main purpose is to try to kind of help them interpret the work that they see in a gallery, you know, make it more accessible, get them to learn about the artist, their practice, the process, introduce them to ways of maybe communicating that, you know, challenges traditional perceptions of art making. So that's been, you know, incredibly, fulfilling, because you learn a lot from them as well, in the process, or the questions and the prompts that they give you. And you also kind of start to really, through that process, also learn about all these other different artists that you're kind of teaching about, and think about the ways in which you're also kind of communicating your work. And yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned in the beginning I'm trained as a pastry chef, and that all I think about is food. And although I am currently an art educator, really what I dream of doing is just spending my days making more of this stuff that looks like this. Yeah, that's my prospect for now. Is to go back to being a pastry chef fully, but as I was mentioning in another talk today as well, I don't think you abandon the full-timeness of the artistic practice, whatever you do. I mean, whatever it is, even if it's not something that's engaged in the arts, even if you're working in finance or accounting, and you can also be a full-time artist. And this is really what inspires me about the farmers that I've met recently, is that they've all been doing something else or something different. Some of them are in healthcare, some of them have different jobs in the government that they have access to, but also what they really just want to do is grow their own food, or collect wild flora, or keep bees and so on.
I also think that, you know, having a full-time job also allows us to, you know, feed our practice, and not only with ideas but also just financially, and allow us to sustain ourselves so that we can work on the projects that we want to be doing. I mean, it's, you know, it's one thing, you know, applying for grants and trying to get into exhibitions and fellowships, etc. But really, to get to that stage and to get to into those shows, you also need to be working in the background. And I find the only way that I can do that is to also sustain my practice with a full-time job that is paying the bills, and paying for all the material and research, tools, equipment, books, whatever it may be. So yeah, this is an image of me also casting the earth outside of the SEEF studios, and we've been talking about and mentioning SEEF for, you know, a bunch of these slides, but SEEF is the Sana bint Hamdan Emerging Artist Fellowship, and it's a 10-month fellowship in Abu Dhabi, supported by the Salama Foundation. So I work there as a studio manager and mentor, and we were all fellows at one point down the years, and Moza also recently has been faculty fellow in the program. So the alumni from this program are now coming back in and, you know, feeding into this loop that we're trying to create. But yeah, this was something that, you know, I thought was really perfect for my career. Also wanting to be someone who, you know, who wanted to go into education. I thought this was a great step right after I graduated from my MFA, and I was, you know, able to lend my experience with things like casting through workshops, and also be the person who has experience from this program, and also get involved with growing communities of artists. And I think every year we have 16 fellows, and so the alumni group, once they're done with their cohort, just continues to grow.
I want to just continue talking about this UAE ecosystem, because we've talked a lot about SEEF, but I wondered if you could talk about other opportunities that exist within this ecosystem that have also nurtured and developed your practice. What other opportunities have you found that have been really helpful for other young artists, or if it's not you yourself?
Sorry, this is from C.
And tonight we'll be sponsored by
God.
Jameel and SEEF.
Maybe this should say something just about how really life-changing that program was. But I don't think, this is not to say if you haven't been part of this program ever, you're never, thinking about going into it. Or I think it's really, really, really back to the point of the idea that there's been this decade of building this community, and that what Nasser was just saying about, not only did we enter that program and go off and do our studies, but we're kind of like looping back into this community in different roles, whether it's in education or actually taking up our art careers as full-time as well, and working in the different institutions. And I think, what's been so beneficial is being part of something that is completely supportive, that did not ask for something so tangible in return. So there was not really like any reports we had to produce or big exhibitions that we had to put up. But that, there was this kind of soft expectation that you will want to come back and contribute in some way. And I think this is, we're seeing, the seeds of that just blossoming now, from 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really, I think it's hard to go out in the ecosystem and not bump into a SEEF alumni. I think there's, so many of them, and I think it's been a huge development potential. But I think there's also other programs that exist. Crossing my fingers for the next slide.
Oh no!
I should have approved these first. Sorry. Really, I'm teasing.
No, but I think, I think what's really important is, especially for younger artists, is that you put in a lot of effort in trying to look for what's out there. Because I think also, institutions do a lot of outreach, and this event is an example of that.
Exactly.
But this was also, I think this is the first time I've seen an event of this scale, trying to reach out specifically to artists of that generation, of that age group. And that's something that I didn't, or I wasn't lucky to have also. So I guess my response to that was just really to look up everything that was available and apply to everything. And this is from when I was in SEEF. I'm on the right side of the image. But this was also, I was just trying to demonstrate how that ecosystem works, is that you input something, which is your time and your effort and dedication, and then over the years, this begins to pay back. And I think that, that applies to most of these programs. There's people who apply to SEEF 3, 4, 5 times until they actually get into the program, because it's extremely competitive and it only gets more competitive every year. But what's also important to note is that when we have fellows that are leaving the program, they've formed a new community. And that community continues to grow, because then they begin introducing new artists who haven't been through the program, but they introduce them to other people who they met through the program. And then new ecosystems begin to build. Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, this is mine too.
But maybe I can say something, like one last thing, also to kind of, give credit to our hosts here, because I think that, Jameel Arts Centre for me has a very special place in my practice as well, because, I mean, 2018, I took a trip to Iraq, my first trip back, and I was doing a bunch of research and kind of came back with all of this kind of like wealth of knowledge and information that I was trying to kind of process. And I was invited by Jameel Arts Centre to participate in the very first Library Circles program. And that an opportunity for me to, like, it really is about kind of thinking out loud, or, trying to like actually think through the work as you put it on. For me, what it helped me do is really kind of analyze and synthesize some of the research that I'd been doing specifically around the minaret of Ana. And also it provided me an opportunity to invite another collaborator, Yusuf Ad-Daham, here to Dubai to have a conversation about heritage preservation, some of the challenges in conflict areas. And, it could end right there. But I think that the team here has really showed a deep engagement and desire to maintain kind of long-term relationships with the artists. So a few months later, I was invited to kind of think about how would you develop this work for Phantom Limb. And so I was able to kind of actually make work in Iraq for the first time and have it shown here. And then a year later I was asked to then contribute to the publication, and here again kind of invited to be part of this conversation today. I think this shows that certain institutions really make an effort to kind of build long-term relationships with artists and not kind of just have them participate in this one thing here, one thing there. And I get emails, like, we have this workshop going on. I'm in a workshop, Jumana Amil Aboud. Like, it's really exciting. And so feeling like, these institutions are not, unapproachable, feeling like you really could be part of a kind of community that's forming, not just within the institution, but around it, is also important to acknowledge.
I also want to say yesterday, I was speaking with this lovely young guy who's part of the Jameel Youth Hub. And he said, this is the first time I've ever been in an institution, and to see what an institution does. And he said, and I said, how is it, what are you thinking about? Has it changed what you're doing? He's like, you wouldn't believe it. I'm starting to think about research, and I'm starting to think about, and it was so exciting because his enthusiasm was just like, he was thrilled. And I know that the Youth Hub is just a new, I think it's probably the third year that you're doing things now, fourth. And, so I think that, this is starting to have their own kind of SEAF-like longevity. Yeah. And I think that that's something that, it takes time to have this kind of momentum. And so I agree with both, examples that everyone is really starting to, develop more and do things. So we're moving into sort of the alternative art communities. And when we look back at, early history of mentorship and, people like Hassan Sharif, who had the Flying House, and people like Muhammad Kazim, who sort of learned from the mentorship opportunities. There was sort of a shift that happened when the sort of universities came into account. And then we moved into, some really exciting spaces like Beit 15 or Beit Al Mamzer, and this is sort of new ecosystems that are popping up. And I just wanted to ask all of you to talk about, alternative communities and how they've been part of your practice sort of outside of the institutional things. Who is this?
That's me. Yeah, I think I spoke a little bit about this project earlier, the project that involved a group of women. And I think, what was maybe special in terms of this project was that it happened during lockdown, and it happened entirely over Zoom. and you'd think that, you're in a room full of strangers, 20, 30 strangers, and you're talking about a lot of really personal things, but somehow we were able to really, some of them kind of knew each other and maybe that helped, but you're able to kind of build that trust, build that community. And these are shots from my kind of first visit to actually meet them in person, and kind of taking all the work that we did in the digital space and like bringing it into real life, being able to spend time with each other, go on walks and kind of develop some of the ideas we had together. yeah, so it really shows you that community isn't just always in the place where you are. Like there's so much opportunity to kind of like now reach out to people and build these sort of relationships and connections anywhere. That's me.
I think the one before was Nasser.
All right.
Okay.
I didn't do
This is another example of a platform that I formed a relationship with when I was in London. And I think what's really interesting is when I became really proactive about just reaching out to different groups and platforms and people taking initiative into creating their own spaces. I think that really carried through into how I work now. It's really rare that I produce work just by myself. I'm always pulling inspiration from people around me. In this case, I mean, I worked with different artists who don't come really from a performance background, and this is something I really like to do in my performances, is not to kind of just work with professional dancers, but work with people who can embody the idea and the research. In this case, we were reimagining a ritual that there's absolutely no record of in a temple of a deity that was worshipped in the Arabian Peninsula. And so kind of trying to think about how do we revive these ancient stories that have no records whatsoever. And then now what it looks like is, obviously I keep mentioning the different farmers that I work with, and that's really it, is also trying to make their work the work. And so currently in Warehouse 421, I'm part of the exhibition that's called On Foraging, and the work on display is the work or the photographs that farmers take of their own landscapes that they are engaged in, and we're trying to build an archive together. And it's funny because they take these pictures with their phones, so they're engaged with, just recording these things digitally, and I'm kind of pulling them back into the analog and the physical. And I've also worked with a muralist who produces these really romantic, idealized versions of what the landscape here is. And currently just putting that on display and calling it what it is, which is art, and questioning those things in their own right as images, just as much as I would question my own images that I create.
The path of being an artist is not always a straight road. You get rejected. An exhibition may fall through. We had lots of problems during COVID. Do you ever get blocked, stuck? And how do you lift yourself out of these creative slumps?
This is a photo from Venice this summer. Actually, Nasser and I were there together. And it's sculptures by Simone Fattal, who's one of my favorite artists, in a Carlo Scarpa garden, who's one of my favorite architects. So it was like, a whole lot of things going on for me emotionally here. But I guess for me, what it represents is just kind of, sometimes it's also about, going out, seeing beautiful things, being touched by stories, just kind of feeding your eyes, feeding your mind. And that for me is always kind of guaranteed to spark a bit of inspiration.
So for me, it's finding a good residency program. I think changing your environment is really important. We're obviously living in a bubble here, and not to say that there's no bubbles everywhere else, but I think changing your bubble can prove quite helpful. I was just in a residency in Delphina Foundation in London, and they're running a program called The Politics of Food, which is, right up my alley. And I spent the last month looking at different foraging practices in London itself, and a little bit outside of London as well. This is a mushroom that's called chicken in the woods. or chicken of the woods. Someone correct me. But I was really inspired. I was like, why is it called that? And why does it look so beautiful? And how can I eat it? And then thinking about how to translate these things back home is such an interesting challenge, which is what I'm preoccupied with at the moment. So this is really how I sustain my practice when I'm in a slump.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is work I made, I guess. But this is something that also came out of a residency. So I agree with Moza. I think sometimes, yeah, just a change of scenery really puts you in that space of trying to think out of the box, try to not force things too hard. And I think, I was in a place where I was really interested in making new work, but I had no leads on how that would begin. And then just out of a conversation, there was a question that was brought up, and I was just trying to, I was just really curious about how to, find resources or find answers to questions when I didn't have any resources in front of me. And, was trying to then create my own resources and create my own narratives out of something where there were no breadcrumbs. And then like really trying to push ideas even when you feel like you've reached some kind of mental block. Because I always feel like even when you take a step back and you leave things alone for a bit, sometimes when you come back to it, you really find an answer, because you really need to let things have their time and space to also speak back to you.
All right. What's the best advice you've received relating to your practice, or what advice would you like to give young artists as they enter this lovely space?
I took an Arabic writing workshop here in the Jameel Library, led by Hussam Hilali, wonderful writer and wonderful workshop conductor as well. And he gave us the best advice at the end of that workshop. He was like, you cannot write well if you don't just experience life. You have to really be able to pull from life. And I've really thought about that as how I've been approaching work. My art practice and my life are so entangled in each other. Sometimes it doesn't feel like work, and not in this romantic sense where I don't feel the pressure of work or I feel joy all the time, but it's, my thoughts and my preoccupations about life, and they come out as the outcomes of my art practice, because I really do believe everyone is an artist. I know this is such a cliche, but I do believe everyone is an artist, and everyone can cook and everyone can sing. And it's not about how well you do these things, it's just that you can. And this is why I also don't believe in, calling art like a hobby or something you do on the side, but it can occupy this full-timeness as well. And really the best way I know how to do these things is to just integrate it so much within my life. So that's my best advice, really, is go live life and make work.
Yeah, I think I'm in very much the same way. My advice is also to go out and look, and look long enough until you can actually see something. This was this was a photograph that I took in Abu Dhabi when the MENA towers were demolished a few days after. And, you know, it was a moment that has, you know, I guess I don't have any real relation to these buildings except for the fact that I used to see them all the time. But yeah, I think, you know, just going out into the world and looking and asking questions, I think that's advice that I would give everyone. I think as an artist, asking questions until there are no more questions to be asked is kind of how I also go about making work, and trying to decide whether, you know, I found an answer or not.
I think I'll kind of build off of what you're saying and also say that sometimes you don't even need to go out into the world. I think one of the most memorable pieces of advice, I don't even know if it was really advice, but I had a professor, I told you guys this story. I had a professor in university that, you know, would say, you know, drawing isn't drawing. Drawing is about pulling. It's drawing from your subject. And I think what Moza and Nasser are both saying is that you kind of have to like look intently, right? And for me, I was sort of, yeah, going out into the world and finding that inspiration and kind of right there on the wall of my family's house since I was 5 years old, lay these objects that have always held so much kind of meaning for me and imagination. And I kind of went and looked at them a little closer, you know, and I learned kind of so much in that process about, you know, some of the drivers in my work as well. So this is actually a little imprint of one of my mom's ceramics. So yeah, sometimes the inspiration is just right there on the wall.
We'll ask a few questions of the audience, but before we do, our last question is just to ask each of them, with all of their robust practices that they have, what are they doing now and what's coming up where people might be able to see their work in the near future? Who's first?
Yeah, this is a project I've been working on for quite a while now, where I've been reading and researching the diary of the personal diary of the former British advisor to the Emir of Bahrain, which is over 2,000 pages long, but I've been, I haven't been reading all of it, but I've been looking closely at entries related to this flower, which is called Nerium oleander. And this flower is special in a way because I heard from some people in Bahrain that this is called the advisor's flower. In reference to him. And allegedly he was the person who planted these flowers all over Bahrain because it was his favorite flower. But the complicated thing here is that these flowers are not indigenous to Bahrain and they're also poisonous. And so I'm really looking at this through the lens of, you know, questioning what, you know, legacy is left by colonialism in Bahrain, and using these flowers as a metaphor and the fact of their toxicity as a metaphor. So these are a couple of photographs that I've taken actually from our garden at home in Bahrain. And as I've been looking and looking, I've seen these plants grow almost everywhere. So this is just a small snippet of a project that I'm working on, and it's going to be opening at Warehouse 421 in January.
So I've been doing a little bit of kind of research over the past couple of years about this one site in northern Iraq called Al-Hadar. And it's this like really sort of complicated, tumultuous history that I'm trying to sort of retell through three main elements, earth, sun, and salt. And there's this tribe, the Shumar tribe, that are kind of have become a very interesting kind of character in the story. And I threw this in because this is just the last image that I found in my research, and I was just kind of like really drawn to its form. And it's a Shumar tribesman, you know, so I'm kind of delving deep into that history right now, and developing a work that will be in the same show, a Warehouse 421, in January.
I too am in the same show, but I will keep my work a secret for now.
Show something.
This is an example of the muralist work that I mentioned, and it is on display now in Warehouse 421, also, as I mentioned, but it's different than the thing that I'll display with you guys later. But where this is expanding into is the Sharjah Biennial in February, where I'm working again with the muralist. And if you just recall the image with the rock formation of the beehive, so I'm bringing in formations from the landscape along with these murals and presenting them for the biennial. I'm also working with the Beekeepers Association into planting their seasonal calendar of melliferous plants, which are plants that have nectar. And we're planting them in a very special roundabout in Sharjah. I'm not going to say more. But we're going to have beehives again. And this is really a special thing to present and also think about, because this also started with the bee work that I presented in Hay Jameel in Jeddah last year, where we also had beehives. We also worked with a beekeeper. We were also, we managed to show a film and a sound piece and kind of integrate all these outputs together. So this feels really really full circle, yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for anyone tonight?
There's a hand.
Oh, yay. I think we need to have a microphone, don't we? You guys can share. I won't be careful.
Sorry, actually I have 3 questions. So is it fine? Of course. Sorry. Okay, so for the first one, there's a saying, not everything you do is gold. So what do you do with the artworks you don't like? That's the question.
Okay. I want to maybe go back to what Nasser was saying. You don't throw anything out, but you don't have to make everything precious. I think this is also a really good point to bring up, that thinking this way of like not everything is precious and not everything has to become this big piece of work also removes the pressure of what resources you have to use to make work. And so being an artist can be a very classist endeavor. It's some people think if only you have the money for it, if only you have the access to certain schools or programs, then only you can become an artist. And I think it's in challenging those things and just making and not worrying about if this becomes an outcome that's worthy of exhibiting, or just leaving it to the side and seeing what happens, I think is my approach.
Sorry, so you don't burn it or like...
No, I'm not a romantic artist in that sense.
Unless it's about burning.
Yeah, thank you.
It is about burning.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, I don't throw anything out. There's tons of stuff in my studio that no one's seen, and they won't see probably. But yeah, I mean, failure is a huge part of making work. I don't believe it if anyone says that they've never failed in making work. You just have to, you really just have to do it, and because you have to learn from the mistakes, and yeah, sometimes it's gold, but not often.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think there's also, there isn't really a kind of start and end date for a lot of the work that you do. You know, a lot of it is kind of ongoing inquiries. And so maybe in that moment, you haven't fully realized it to what you feel could be its full potential. But you're learning along the way. You're doing other projects. You're gaining other insights. And then so maybe a couple of years later, you return to it with kind of a whole new set of experiences that you can kind of help push it further.
Thank you. So for the second question, sorry. I'm a fashion designer professionally. And the thing is like, as an artist, what do you do for sustainability? Because like me right now, I want to quit my job because I was like, this is not sustainable. Like, you know, there's a lot of slavery or, you know, a lot of bad things happening with fashion. And designers are also creators. So there's like a struggle between like I don't want to make something now because it's harmful, but yeah, it's paying the bills. So as an artist, what do you think about sustainability? Like how do you make art that is very sustainable? Because like, you know, when you make a painting, you need to have a canvas, and a canvas is like, you know the process. Like that's the struggle for me because right now I'm like trying to paint like more, but yeah. So I wanna know what you think about that.
Look, I think definitely you've become a bit more conscious about the kind of material you use. So there's that kind of element of it, the real, you know, kind of sustainable thinking that we could get into. But I think one thing I want to say is it also depends on how you frame sustainability. You know, I think for me, like, you know, when they talk about sustainable architecture, it's not about solar panels and LEED certification. For me, it's about buildings that the community feels a lot of kind of ownership over and responsibility for, that they'd want to kind of maintain it in the long term. And I think that is true also for the arts. You know, sustainable means something that has longevity within its community as much as within its materiality.
Also, like anything, I really question how much one individual can do, and when you think this way, I think it's really beneficial to think, how do you apply pressure on the you know, the systems that could influence, you know, this, you know, changing these materials, or changing how they hire people or how they compensate people. And I mean, in art making, you can really work with found matter, with things that are recycled or whatever. But I think it's what Rand said, like you really have to define those things and see what the source is. I don't think one person can just fix everything. You might be sustainable, but someone else is kind of not, and using a lot of plastic, or I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I also think you can make work about. And where the central themes, concepts, whatever it may be, is about sustainability, and that's also a way of conveying a message to a larger and broader audience. So I mean, that's, I guess, one way. Another way is also, you know, just on an individual level, like you're saying, just trying to be economical, trying to make the most out of what is available to you in your studio. So yeah, I think in small ways, that's how I go about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just asked the question because like I feel like in fashion it's happening, like there's a movement, like yeah, people should be conscious about it. But I think in art we're still not on there. Like I'm still struggling to find like sustainable materials. Like for example, painting. Like I think it's not yet big for that.
It's also just a very different scale. You know, when you're looking at fashion, that's this kind of global industry that's churning out kind of millions and millions of the same pieces. You know, it's very different than a kind of individual artist making one piece. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And then for the last question, I'm so sorry. How do you keep yourself sane? Like, you know, making art is sanity for me. Like, you know, I have to do a lot of activities, like go to the gym, go somewhere, do sports, like to keep myself sane, because yeah, it's kind of a lot. So how do you keep yourself sane
Let
as
me
an
know
artist?
when you find out.
No, I'm serious.
I don't know. I think it's you know, I don't think that has to do anything with just art. You find,
Friends.
yeah, I think, yeah, maybe we spoke enough about building a safe space and a community that you feel that you can express yourself freely in. Um, but I think a healthy dose of like disgust towards your work sometimes, or like criticality and questioning those things. I think those things are healthy. I think a little bit of imposter syndrome. I think a little bit of those feelings that we brand as negative sometimes, to let them just pass by. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, unless it becomes severe, and therefore, obviously, there are other solutions for that.
Thank you.
You want me to go next? Okay. I think it's also about kind of having other interests. It's, having something to occupy your mind or your body, whether it's sports, whether it's, any other craft or something that you want to participate in. I think that kind of having that healthy balance, even in terms of your conversations. So, of course, we have this kind of very tight-knit kind of art circle, but it's also nice to have conversations that are not about that. I think that helps me maintain my sanity as well.
Yeah, I would just say more or less the same. I mean, finding a balance. I mean, to be honest, don't often find myself, don't find that when I'm working on my artwork that I like struggle with it in that way. I think there's other things in my life that contribute to that. But yeah, I think it really is about finding a balance, and if there's something that is making you feel that way, then questioning why. Finding ways around it. It could be finding an alternative way of how to convey that emotion through the work, if the work needs it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, a couple more.
Hi. First of all, I really enjoyed this talk. I think it was really great to have a little bit of an insight into your practices. And a question, since SIF was a recurring theme, I just wanted to know, I think you all mentioned in various different ways that SIF was a very big part, or introduced a big shift in your practices. And what is it exactly that caused this shift? I assume it's, maybe similar or different for all of you, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I'm answering first.
Okay.
This is very important, because even if you don't ever get to see, if I think this is really the secret, change your tools and surround yourself by your peers, and just give yourself as many prompts as possible. So let's say you're a painter. Challenge yourself to not look at painting the same way, or perhaps abandon painting for a little while and think about other forms of image making, and just do things that you are just so uncomfortable with for a significant period of time, while putting those exercises up for critique to people that you trust, and feel safe around. And I think really, really, that's all that it was. So whether or not you're engaged in a program that does that, if you don't ever get that opportunity, it is doable. It is totally doable.
I agree. I think, at its core, it's a very simple kind of premise. Very, very simple curriculum, and it teaches you basic things, but those are things that you can do for yourself. And I think, being comfortable, being uncomfortable is a big one. Questioning the things that you make and why you make them, and being critical of your own practice, and having a healthy criticality of everything that you see. Yeah. But I completely agree with Moza. I think it is obviously a very an amazing opportunity, but I think these are things that I hope more and more people can start to internalize and do them themselves. And our hope is that, you know, the people who come out of this program then begin to share that information with everyone else. It's not something that is meant to be a secret. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't even, is my mic on? Yeah. Okay. I don't even know if it's so much about like, yeah, like the prompts in the program for me as much as it is the kind of overall wrapper, in the sense that it's a space, you know, like a space to be in close proximity to other people, a space to really not be fussy about messing up and trying new things and taking, yeah, like taking your work in a path that you never really kind of imagined. And I think that's, for me, what's most special about SEEF. It was, you know, before that, you're kind of working on your own at home. There aren't a lot of opportunities to be kind of making within close proximity to other people. And you know, unfortunately, that is something that I think still needs a bit of development here in the UAE. I mean, there's a few examples that you could point to, Tashkil being one of them. And then, you know, people like Hashil and Metha, who kind of set up a space for themselves like that with Bait 15, kind of graduating from SEEF. So I think there is kind of potential for that model to be replicated. But really, for me, it's really was about community and physical proximity.
Well, I'll also say that, you know, I think for a lot of people who are going into SEEF and the people who are applying and who are nominated, I find that a lot of people make work in response to an exhibition, an open call, something like that. It's rare that you find people making work just for the sake of making work, not trying to show it a year from now, or more often than not, 2 months from now. So yeah, really trying to get people out of that mindset and into the mindset of making for the sake of making, and allowing the work to really take its time in its development and making mistakes along the way. And the program is set up like that. Like, it's set up to kind of make you fail in the beginning. And I think even in the first week, people are thrown into something, for the most part, they haven't done before. And you just have to learn, yeah, on your feet and do something with it.
No, that's incredibly helpful. I think it's interesting to think about it as a community space, as well as, like you said, Moza, it's almost just shifting your perspective or being able to really go outside of your comfort zone. And I definitely think that's something that can be achieved even individually, or, you know, being able to create your own space. So yeah, thank you so much.
One last question in the back right there. That will be the last one. Say it into the mic. That will be the last question of the evening. The woman in the back,
Okay.
it's right over there.
But I'll come talk to you later.
Sorry, I didn't see you. I just appreciate everyone's time tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for taking your extra time. I know everyone's tired. I just have a quick question. Hope it is. After the eye-opener today and yesterday at the career fair, there are so many opportunities, and as a senior motion designer and an artist, a graduate from Faculty of Fine Arts, Damascus University, now I'm thinking about being more involved in art and like separating myself from the corporate world. I don't want to forever work for clients and do endless, pointless edits for infographics. So just thinking about being in a program or being a resident, I think about my bills, I think about rent, and I think about all the finances that I'm bearing now from my full-time job. So if you can just give me a quick insight of the financial side of being like a full-time artist or in a program, that would be great. Thank you.
I mean, we were all talking about, I mean, we all have full-time jobs. And I think that we were saying that it's quite essential to sustaining a practice because it gives us some freedom financially to do the things that we to pursue the things we want to. But I'd also say that, you know, with these programs that we were talking about today, I think for the most part, the people who are in them also have full-time jobs or they're full-time students at university. And these institutions are aware of that. So the programs are planned around that to try to accommodate. So yeah, my recommendation is don't quit yet. But try to dip your toes into these programs. I think once you begin to do that, you'll get a much better idea of what that's like.
I just really want to highlight that it's not a failure whatsoever to have a full-time job while having a full-time art practice. For the last 2 years, I had to adjust financially to be able to run my studio and to be able to sustain my practice. I actually have 2 jobs. I do food tours. I'm a food tour guide and I teach at SIF. And I run my art practice full time. So essentially I have 3 jobs. And I really do whatever it takes to, I've adjusted my life to be able to propel my practice and now feel like maybe now is the time that I can shift again. And I think it's really that, it's not taking, you know, my method or Nasser's method or Rand's method like as is, it's really trying to find what is the way that you can be the most realistic about what your needs are and being able to meet your needs financially as well as not cutting corners with your own art practice. How can they both exist together? And only you can find that answer. I know that's very frustrating, but I think what we're just hoping to present today is that this is the reality of what it's like to be an artist that's working without assistance. Like I don't have a studio assistant or an intern yet. Maybe someday my practice is going to develop where I do have a team, and then I can kind of, be financially stable in other ways and only through my art practice. But at the moment, this is what it looks like as, someone who is producing their work on their own and relying on institutions' help. I want to just say a quick hello to Judesh here from Warehouse 421, who, without the help of someone from the production team in Warehouse 421, I couldn't have, for example, done my my piece at the moment. So it's also relying on what networks exist. I also want to say a quick shout out to Maria here from the learning team in Hay Jameel, who completely put together the beekeeping workshops, which were an essential part of my work. And so it's not to look at these opportunities as like, oh, this is what I cannot do. It's really working with what is available to you and being able to receive the help and support from institutions, from your friends, and just moving forward with that as you sustain yourself in your practice.
I think maybe just also a little bit of a disclaimer to say that alhamdulillah, the 3 of us are fortunate in the sense that we actually like our full-time jobs and they feed our practice more than they drain our practice. And so like, yeah, we can all say it's fine to have a full-time job and be an artist, but we also, I think it's important to recognize that that's not always the case, And so I think my advice to you would be like, could you find something that could support you financially, but also feed you in a different way, Like I think we get a lot of satisfaction from the kind of work that we do, and it somehow infiltrates into our work. And so, yeah, I would say maybe kind of search for those opportunities, or maybe it's what you're doing, but where you're doing it, finding the right organization that allows you to be a bit more creative, expressive in everything that you're kind of doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Jameel, and I want to thank everyone for staying till the very end of the Career Festival. So thank you, everyone.